le festival d'un pays qui a une si prestigieuse tradition littéraire.
Un monólogo interior no es sencillo de hacer una película.
Sonaba su jazz clásico disolviendo las gafas.
Shall not be seen to more.
I wrote this essay, which is 59 facts about Albuquerque.
Filbita para mí es una exquisitez.
Comparte saberes para los chicos y para los grandes.
Podemos expresar lo que queremos.
Mi cuerpo argentino pretende ser irónico.
El escritor lo es siempre de la literatura que falta.
Hay una cuestión geográfica en la circulación de la literatura, una cuestión de mapas y fronteras, ciertas rutas que lleva tiempo recorrer.
Hola a todos y a todas, muchas gracias por estar del otro lado de la pantalla de este Filba Online 2020. Estamos muy contentas de la conversación que va a venir ahora entre dos autores que se admiran mutuamente. Estamos hablando de Mike Harrison, autor inglés, uno de los grandes representantes del New Weird, de la ciencia ficción, autor de muchísimos libros, algunos de los cuales por suerte podemos leer en castellano y con muy buenas traducciones. Por ejemplo, El curso del corazón, que publicó hace unos años, reeditó hace unos años Sigilo, y conserva la traducción de Andrés Ehrenhaus. Libro de relatos, preparativos de viaje. Esta es una edición de la primera interzona. Él va a hablar con Mariana Enriquez, autora que no necesita mucha presentación para nosotros. Mariana sigue cosechando lectores en todas partes del mundo, reconocimientos. Su última novela, Nuestra parte de noche, premio Ralde, está siendo traducida, bueno, ya fue traducida a muchísimas lenguas y acaba de ganar hace muy poquito un premio más, el premio de la crítica en España. Así que hace mucho que queremos reunirlos. Si recordarán que Harrison participó el año pasado del Filba. Justo en ese momento Mariana estaba de viaje, así que no pudieron coincidir, y hoy en día, bueno, gracias a la virtualidad podemos reunirlos. Así que los dejo con esta conversación. Recuerden suscribirse a este canal de YouTube para seguir el festival, todo lo que queda del festival, que es un montón. Pueden ver la programación en la página de Filba, en filba.org.ar, y recuerden que pueden seguir y comentar todas las charlas en redes sociales con el hashtag Filba 2020. Los dejo con Mike Harrison y con Mariana Enriquez. Gracias.
Okay, Mike. First, welcome back. I mean, you're not here, but you're here, which is kind of weird and amazing at the same time. And but it's also sad that we can't be in the world of, you know, physical stuff. So I just finished. I want to tell people that his last two books haven't been translated. One is this, that is a couple of years ago, I think. You should come with me now, Stories of Ghosts. It's amazing. But there's also the novel that I don't have here because I read it, but I couldn't have the book. But still, even...
Hang on.
You have it? Yeah, I showed them. The cover is amazing.
There we go.
Yeah, Sunken Land Begins to... but even if we, of course, people haven't read them, I think there's certain themes in the novels that maybe we can talk about. But first, I remember this time of year last year, you spoke in an event in support of XR writers, I think.
That's right.
In London. Yeah, in London, and you read a piece that you called a rant. I think it's in your blog. It's ambienthotelwordpress.com. You should go there. And that said, prophecy is over, persuasion is over, action is the last thing, rebellion is the last thing left. Can you tell us what happened that day, how you joined this, what happened? And then the pandemic kind of came very close. So this movement it's kind of lost momentum or something.
It's very true. It did seem to lose momentum. What happened was that they got in touch with me as a science fiction writer and asked, if I would like to say something at that particular meeting, and obviously I did have something to say, but what I found that I had to say rather surprised me, which was that science fiction is always associated with prophecy. And it suddenly occurred to me that if you've been prophesying disaster for the last 40 years of your career, what are you going to write when you suddenly realize that the disaster has actually happened? What should a writer do in those circumstances? What is the position of a writer in the world in those circumstances, especially a writer of fiction? If you can no longer be a prophet, what is now your function? So I made a rant about that, and I've been thinking about it ever since, to be honest. I've been kind of trying to examine my own position as a writer, because one doesn't want to become simply a reporter.
Yeah.
I don't believe, and I'm sure you don't believe, that writing fiction is a matter of reportage. It's not a matter of being a journalist or trying to keep up with what's going on. That doesn't seem to me to be the function of a novelist. But what is the function of a novelist? I mean, maybe you can tell me.
No, I have no idea. I think it's certainly political, but I think we have to think about what that means too. Because we can say things, and say things it's very easy, but what's happening is that, and I think in Sunken Lands it's very clear something about that. Conspiracy theories, all these narratives that are not fiction exactly, because it's not exactly fiction, it's something else, but it's not exactly news, and people kind of call them fake news, but it's not fake in the same way that you can call, in a way, fiction fake. What are these narratives? What are people reading here? And where is truth? And that is kind of, I read something that you said that in the next years, fiction will be over because people will be overwhelmed by fiction. But I don't think people think this is fiction. This is the problem. And sometimes I'm kind of confused too.
Yeah.
Like in these days of the pandemic, for example, I'm on the phone with my mama. My mama is kind of a pretty smart woman, but I had to deprogram her with all kinds of fake, And what is this? It's fiction. What do we do with this? It's in one of the characters in the Sunken Land has a blog with all these theories about the water people, let's say. But the water people are real, aren't they?
Well, are they?
Are they?
I'm never entirely sure. I was never entirely sure, I think, whether they were real or not. I think you're intended to understand that they're real, yes. And that the real reason that the central characters don't understand what's going on is that they're simply not paying enough attention. Basically, they're too self-involved, too narcissistic, to pay enough attention to what they call these days a hyper object, such as the climate or whatever. That they're missing this. But it's interesting that you should say that the the difference between conspiracy theory and fake news on one hand and fiction on the other is that people believe in fake news, that they assume that it is news, they believe in that they believe in a conspiracy theory, that they assume it's not a conspiracy, as it were. I can agree with that, but at the same time, I do think that we are steadily losing, as consumers of news, whether it's fake or real, a sense of what is fictionalized and what is not fictionalized. That so much news is shaped and controlled by concepts like story. You know, journalists use the term story, and their use of it is getting closer and closer to my use of it or your use of it as fiction writers. It seems to me that to a degree, all they're interested in now is the structure of the story, the way I would be, rather than the actual content, rather than whether it's true or not. Is it a good story? Not is it a true story, as it were? Does it make a good story? Does it make good news? I find that quite frightening.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, especially because sometimes plot of these conspiracy theories is very bad. There's too much of it. I was reading the QAnon thing the other day, and it's like, okay, they have children underneath Central Park that they are abusing, and then this all, you can enter this by a pizza place, and it's like, what? No, this is a bad novel.
Yes, it's very good. Yes, it's bad fiction, not just fiction, it's bad fiction. Yes.
It's bad. It's like, if I start this, I would be like, no, this doesn't make any sense. Boom. And I don't know. Yeah. To go back to the Sunken Land, it's like, I found it very classic Harrison. Like, you know, main events somehow are in the background, and the people are kind of know that something is going on, that something in reality is shaking, but they can't apprehend it at all. And also it's England in the background. England, you know, the Midlands especially. I don't know that much of your country, but I find sometimes very, I don't know, some train journeys very sad in a way. I don't know. But there's something about him going in those trains in the Midlands. There's a mood of dread. It's, you know, a bit of a wasteland. And I was reading reviews, and they say it's like a Brexitania kind of novel, like Brexit Britain is kind of here. Yeah. And how? Can you tell us how? Because maybe we don't understand really how. I don't think we understand really how Britain ended in Brexit at all.
I don't think we do either. It was a bit of a shock to us. I mean, the kind of hidden joke of the book is that it can be decoded completely as a sort of not so much a Brexit novel as a coded set of references to how Brexit happened to us, and basically I think how it happened to the middle class liberal in Great Britain is by complete surprise. 1 minute life was as it had been. The next minute we were careering over the waterfall, over the Niagara Falls, and into Brexit. It was as if it had happened incredibly suddenly, you know, over a period of 2 years. First there was no Brexit, and next Brexit was on its way, and everybody was really surprised. Everybody on the left was very surprised by this. And yet it became clearer and clearer that it had all been happening quietly in the background for a very long time. And that's what gave me the idea of writing the book in that particular way. this idea that that a political movement had been ignored, because that's what happened. We were, in a sense, in denial that this could happen. And then suddenly, bang, it was all there. It was all done. We have the situation that we now have. And I found that really frightening. I have to say, I found that possibly the most frightening thing in my whole life, was to discover that, because you go back to the 1920s and 30s, and you always say to yourself, how could they possibly not have known what was going on in Germany in the 1930s? And yet, bang, we didn't know that Brexit was creeping up on us.
Well, it's totally different, the context and everything. Of course, Latin America is totally different to Europe. But a country like Brazil, that it's ruled by a madman now, I never saw that coming. I mean, I like politics, I talk to people, I was very interested in the previous government of Brazil, and then suddenly it's Bolsonaro, and Bolsonaro is a fascist, like a classic fascist.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's Brazil. It's Brazil with the beaches and the bossa nova, and, for us, especially in Argentina, it's kind of quieter. It was like the land of where to go to be free. And how did it happen? And it became an ultra-religious country too, and this happened in nothing. 2 years, 3 years, and like that, it's gone. So it's very frightening. It's like too fast, and there's something that I consider myself someone that leans left, and the fact that I'm like so far behind.
Yes.
It's like, whoa.
I think to a degree it does show that however careful you are, you tend to live in a bubble. You tend to see what you want to see. However careful you're being not to do that, somehow you become settled in your ways, in your assumptions about the political landscape. And you precisely do not see the things you want. If you don't want to see a thing, you don't see it. It's really, really scary.
Well, it's what happens with the social media. Like, you're very active on Twitter, and in your timeline that you curated, and you can basically see a world that is your world.
Yeah, that's what it is. And however many times you warn yourself that that's the case, that you do slip into the idea of thinking that is the world.
Yeah. We're in difficult shit, Mike.
Very true. That is a very good way of putting it. And I might say a very literary way of putting it.
Yeah. And another thing that is kind of a theme in your alienation that we've been talking about now is the thing in of course, in all your writing, even in the things that are very different to Sunken Lands or to the short stories I liked, for example. But another thing that, to me, as a writer from here, from not only from South America but from Argentina, that was very influential, I have to say, is that a theme in your work that kind of comes all the time is disappearance. People disappear in your stories. They choose. Sometimes they disappear in their own houses. There's a short story in this one, and you should come with me now, that this man disappears in his own house. But many disappear from their lives, and even in Light, for example, the girl that becomes a spaceship, she kind of disappears too from her own body.
Yeah.
And do you have any theory about where this comes from? Like, in what is the state of mind that makes you so, going back and back to these disappearances?
I'm at the moment, I'm beginning to write a non-fiction book.
Okay.
Which basically was intended simply to compile elements of the blog that I do. Many people had said to me, why don't you do a book of the blog? And I began to play around with that as an idea. And the first thing I did was to collect every single blog entry that I felt might have some relevance. And my intention was to, as it were, catalogue that material. And I decided to do it very quickly on an almost biographical basis, on a biographical timeline, autobiographical timeline. And what I found from that was that every time I had referred to my early life on the blog, I had been attempting to understand why I had disappeared from my own life, why I had wanted to disappear from my own life. Now, there's no answer to that. I seem to have been, from a very early age, interested in not being there, and at the same time rather frightened of not being there. Who knows what this means psychologically or emotionally? To a degree, it's not the kind of thing that I would want to follow up, because I'm more interested in the methodology of a whole life spent trying to disappear. And I came up with various images, one of which is on the blog and in a lot of the short stories, including the one you've mentioned, I think. Storage of personal items is often used as an index of the person's disappearance as a human being. Why this fascinates me, as I say, I don't know, but I should be able to analyze it a bit by writing this book, by assembling these blog posts and notes and general journal entries and those kinds of things, which I won't organize in I won't organize it in a smooth literary manner. It will be very fragmentary, very jerky, very much like the original blog posts and the notebooks, to give a feeling of, I don't know, being there rather than having it written into, some kind of literary form. I
understand. Yeah, less architecture. And
yeah, absolutely. Or a hidden architecture. And an architecture which is aware of, say, autofiction without doing it.
Yeah, I understand. How long have you been keeping the blog anyway?
The blog I've been doing for since 2007. And my notebooks go all the way back to 1982. So were I to dig really deep into the notebooks, I could find stuff that old. But because I'm an imagist, because I'm really only interested in fragmentary images that flicker up for the reader, none of it is connected. I've almost tried to avoid any kind of connective tissue between elements. And I think that's part of the whole disappearance thing, is that these are not memories anymore. They're just like these images that flicker through. It's fascinating. I have to say, it's fascinating when you're 75 years old and you realize that you can't remember most of your life, even though you've written a lot of it down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very strange. Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah.
I remember when you published Climbers, I was reading things around that. And at some point you said something like, paraphrasing, but you said that you needed to stop writing fiction and go back to something very physical, like something, that connected you to the world.
Yeah.
And kind of sounds like that, this to me. Like, obviously it's climbing, today with the pandemic, it's difficult to do it, and I don't know if you're doing it anymore. But of course, you reach to material things in different ways, at different points of your life, and it kind of feels like that. Not trying to get a sense of something that is not it's in the physical world, to be in touch with the physical world. But that's kind of a ghostly thing too. Yeah. It's like I'm kind of a ghost and I need a rock.
Yeah. It does seem to be part of the same gesture, you know. All the ghosts in You Should Come With Me Now, and much of the ghostly business in this brand new book, the one that I'm writing, they do seem to be. It does seem to be an image for clinging on. You're quite right, but it never occurred to me that it might be an image for one's own clinging on to some kind of reality. Even though, as I expressed it at 30 years old, I really did want to get away from fiction and into something real. I'd spent 10 years writing fantasy, and I wanted to be in some kind of situation whereby if you made a mistake, what would happen to you would be real. That was the way I expressed it to myself, that if you fall off a rock climb above a certain height, something very real will happen to you. And it occurs to me that all this is tied up together with how one feels about how one is in the world. As I say, at 75, that's quite interesting. It's quite interesting to come upon that so late in life and think, well, what have I been doing for the whole of my life?
Yeah.
Your relation to disappearance is highly real and highly political.
Yeah, it's totally different. And that's, I don't know if totally different. No, not totally, but when I was reading your fiction and disappearances happened there, of course I understand this. You're writing from a different perspective. But to me, the translation of that to my own experience at what to me are ghosts, that incidentally are also the age of my parents. Because most of the people that were killed and disappeared at the age of the generation of my parents, so our generation is 40-something, is kind of the age of the children of the ghosts. This sometimes in very, very political, environments and stuff is like you're talking kind of nonsense. What are you talking ghosts? And these people were assassinated and stuff. Yeah. But my way of processing that kind of trauma was through fiction, was thinking about it that way.
Yeah.
And it was still very powerful because it helped me in a way, understand what my fascination with certain dark things was coming from, and how political power can do that, can actually create something like that. Because if you go to some human rights march here in downtown Buenos Aires, you will see the pictures of the dead. And when I started marching, they were my age. And now they could be my children. And this is kind of what the ghost is something that is very repeating himself all the time and telling you, this injustice happened to me and help me. And you can't, because injustice has been done in another plane, in another reality, and now you can't fix it anymore. And the permanence of injustice is something that was very important to me.
Yeah.
And there's something about the sadness of the disappearance in your characters and how they decided that there was kind of a different flavor to this very political thing and a way of understanding. And about life, there's something interesting in Sunken Land show at one point. There is an amazing character. He's totally, he doesn't even know what stuff is his. He's amazing. And and even very, I won't spoil it to people because it's going to be translated maybe in a while, but I don't want to say, but very, I don't know, macabre things happen to him, and he kind of goes through them like it's nothing. This is the self-obsession you were talking to. It's like he's mildly crushed. And at one point you say, what's the proper speed for living? What's the appropriate density? What even constitutes a life? And I think it's a novel about identity too. And that's why I think it's also amazing that the mother is kind of losing the grip with reality. And at the same time, she might be the most lucid person.
In the whole book.
Yeah.
It's true. I think that's another aspect of his ghostliness. You know, both he and Victoria have been turned into a ghost is separate from life. Whether you have been made a ghost from outside, as you describe, by political circumstances, whether that's true or whether it's true that you have somehow made yourself a ghost by separating yourself from life, you're still a ghost. It's another way of being a ghost, and for me, writing the book, it was another way of showing that self-involvement and narcissism are what makes that kind of ghost, that kind of ghost that Shaw is. It was a fascinating thing to do, absolutely fascinating. And as you say, he seems to be able to walk through life without being in life. And to me, that is the talent of a ghost. In the end, that is the talent of a ghost, is to walk through life without being in life. I think that's quite a different thing. In a way, I am describing the failure of neoliberal society to make people who are really people. Whereas you are describing what happens when real things happen in a real world, and there is no way of denying that. There's no way of evading it as a human being. Very strange.
Yeah. Also, I remember in Climbers and many stories of the Climbers, the people, I don't know how real they were, I don't know how much is fiction and how much is not in the novel, but they're very strange too. They're very self-involved too, in a way. And I find that in a lot of people that are obsessed with sports, for example, I'm married, this is kind of something I just throw around, but I'm married to a guy that was a cyclist. And you were talking about your diaries and stuff, and it's amazing because he was crossing Yemen at one point. And what he writes down, it's kilometers. And it's like, I was like, Paul, he's Australian. And he was, Paul, it's Yemen. How do you care about how many kilometers and headwinds you have? What is going on here? And it's, how you not know? And he was like, no, but people are very nice. Okay, but why is not written down the people? I mean, and in Climbers, I found that somehow too, like people very obsessed with the task, and in a way, evading from life too. Did you feel that too at one point that you were like? Yeah.
It was about that. It's about obsessive escapism. It's about. I was originally going to write it about surfers. Because actually that's the kind of classic content that you would use. But I suddenly realized that if I did that, I would have to learn to surf. So basically I already knew how to climb, so I wouldn't have to do any research. And it was a kind of dual thing because it made me look at other people. It forced me, the method that I used forced me to look at other people and take account of other people and to try and understand other people, which you don't generally do in science fiction. You certainly didn't do that in science fiction in the 1960s and the 1970s in Great Britain. You weren't really interested in people. People were actants in a plot. People had personalities only to the degree that they would make the plot move along, sort of thing. And I wanted, part of my idea of trying to get away from fantasy and looking at life was to write something that made me look at other people, that made me look at reality and put it down on the paper. So on one hand, I was forced to do that, but at the same time, I was looking at people who, like myself, were completely obsessive escapists without really knowing it. The greatest thing about rock climbing is that if you suffer anxiety, it gives you a reason.
That's amazing. Yeah.
You know, your day really fires up when you're 80 feet above the ground and things are going wrong, and you suddenly think, wow, I've got a reason to be worried for today. You know, this is a genuine reason to be worried, instead of this constant waking up and experiencing anxiety for no reason at all. It's a fantastic relief to have a reason to feel anxiety. It was amazing to discover that one of the realest things that you could do, which is to put yourself in that sort of position. I mean, a motorcyclist going into a bend at speed feels the same. I'm not saying that this is simply climbers who feel this. Anybody who does an adventure sport of any kind, often just driving down a motorway, you know, will give you that sensation. But it was exciting to make these discoveries and to put them down in a book and to look at it afterwards and think, those were, by the way, quite real people. They were mostly my friends, who were very decent about being painted in that particular way, you know. And so I felt that book had not just allowed me to get in touch with reality, it had let me get in touch with myself, but and furthermore, it had taught me a lot about writing that I didn't know until then. You know, people now say to me, how come you can do your backgrounds so realistically? How come that you can balance realism with the weirdness? Well, all of that comes from climbers. That comes from looking at the world. And it's still something that I really like to do. I really like to write things. I like to look at things and write them down as if I'm painting them. Now, I feel that about your short stories too. I feel as if you know how to look at things, you know?
I understand, yeah. People are always tell me too, like, how do you mix reality with supernatural, because I don't do science fiction really, because I think I can't count, and it's, I don't know, it's like too, I don't know what it is. I find it a bit, I don't understand basically. Like you I didn't. You say quantum physics to me and I'm like, wow. And I have no idea. I enjoy it, but it's like reading something that I'm not entirely sure what it is. It's like very, very, very weird to me. It happened lately. It happened with me with Ted Chiang, I think, that he uses philosophy of language and things like that, and I don't understand anything. And but I was very, I don't know. There's something about Borges there, something, you know, that you don't entirely grasp, but there's something. But yeah, people are kind of surprised at you know, how can you mix the supernatural and realism? And to me, looking at things, listening at things, something that you do, and I think I learned from reading your stuff too, is overhearing conversations.
Yeah.
This to me is very important, like being somewhere and actually listening to how people talk.
Yeah.
And the things people say, and writing it down, and then I write them down, and then somehow I use it. And sometimes, when you were talking about prophecy before, sometimes they become like prophecy, like something that people said in certain circumstance, and it's totally related to the situation. And it's like, how? Who was that talked? And that's what's weird to me. That's what the portal is to me. That's what when people say liminal spaces, it's not really liminal. It's this, overhearing things and all this trying to pay attention to reality, and and also describing something that I really like about your book is describing brands, certain places, specific places, name of shops, stuff like that. And last time I was in London. I was in Lewisham, I think. I was staying in Lewisham, and it was very nice, I think, in your novel to find things like, the parlors for the women and a lot of things that are very. I didn't think that were so typical of London in a way, a tattoo place, things like that, the very city places. But you don't live in London, do you? Live in like, what's the name of it's a town? What is it? I never know.
I live in Shropshire now. I live in a little town quite near a place called Ironbridge, where the Industrial Revolution started. Which is basically a very steep gorge with a river at the bottom, and a lot of very ancient factories and things, which really got going in the mid 1700s. It's an interesting place to live, really. It gave me most of the background for Victoria's.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Whereas the last place I lived in London was Barnes, which was also by the river, by the Thames.
Yeah.
And that gave me Shaw's background. Both are completely photographic, I hope, in their realism. But this fascinates me. When I read your collection, I was jumping up and down, and because I instinctively understood that you too were almost using the concept of liminality to look at reality. It is a portal, but it's a portal to where we already are. Yeah. Which I just think is the way forward for the kind of fiction that we would be associated with.
Yeah, I know.
This is very much the way forward, and it's so great to read someone else doing it.
And it's nice to find people that do. I find many things with China Mieville does that were very important to me also when I was trying to find my voice, because the thing is that we have the fantastic. There's a tradition of the fantastic that you of course know, like Borges and Cortázar and stuff. But that kind of after the 60s and the 70s, when all of Latin America was very about protest and politics and stuff, that was escapistic, evasive literature that you go to, but it was saying nothing about life or politics or what we needed to do to change our reality. There was a disaster and still is, but at that time there was still the hope that maybe you could change it. And this literature was useless because of that. That always worried me. I never felt that, but even some writers felt that. I think Cortázar felt it and changed his literature because of that. Borges, no, because he was more, he was more right-wing. He thought different, and he was from a different era. But it always worried me that the literature of the imagination, whatever you want to call it, and the realism had to be apart, and one has to be, separated in that way. So to me, to find writers, you, Ballard, China Miéville, Ursula Le Guin in a way, all writers that were doing that, but were also putting an eye on reality.
Yeah.
Was kind of finding a tradition, but a tradition that was not mine, but that could be translated in a way, because my tradition had been put aside and was not. It was, how do you mix it? And I remember reading Ballard when I was very young, and here it is, it's mixed.
Yeah, he knows how to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. This is still such a difficulty in publishing in London. Yeah. That my audience has over the last 5 to 10 years spread out. It's broadened away from science fiction and fantasy readers, right? So there's quite a broad spectrum of an audience. But it's really hard to persuade an editor that the reason for that is that I do the two things at the same time. It's really difficult to say to an editor, look, the reason you find this so interesting and exciting is that it does both things at the same time. If I were to go back to being a science fiction writer, or if I were to become a realist writer of literary fiction, that quality would disappear.
Of course.
It would vanish.
I think that happens too because the English literature, not only English but North American too, the market is so big that you've been very. I mean, the writers. I mean, all the writers. You've been very put in boxes.
Yeah.
Like that didn't happen that much here.
No.
So a writer that was very hybrid, like Garcia Marquez, for example. Like Garcia Marquez, is he a realist? No. Is he? I mean, of course, magical realism was also a brand to position Latin American literature. It was like a political movie. It's like, we're here, we do this. But then if you read them, they're all different.
Yeah.
But what he does is not, of course, realistic, but it's not fantastic only. And so this mixture, it's more common for us, but also has to do with the market. It's not only about the sensibility of the people, of the readers, of something, pure and nice about us. No, it's about that we don't have a market like that. And a market like that made shelves I go to a bookshop in London, and they have like this, 4 walls of fantasy, for example. And you have everything there. You have books there that are, Susanna Clarke's book. And it's that, why is it next to, some saga of dragons?
Yeah.
But that, I guess it's very difficult once they put you there. How do you get out of there?
It's very difficult to escape. That's why it's such a relief to be in Buenos Aires at Filba. When I was there, I felt I relaxed again. It was like being on a climb. I could relax because I felt as if everybody here just wrote books. We wrote books. We were writers. Each of us has got a personal solution. When somebody says to you, "What is a writer?" You are the answer. Just you, and then somebody else is the answer as well. We're all the answer. We're all writers, and it's a fantastic sense of relief that you don't have to describe yourself as a science fiction writer or a fantasy writer. You're just you. You're a writer. You have your subject. You have your context. You have your politics. You deep down, you have whatever drives you emotionally to be a writer. That's what you are. You're not a science fiction writer. You're a writer, and that is so good.
Yeah, it must be very, it's, I don't know. I wouldn't describe myself. I mean, it's okay if they want to put me in a title as, the queen of horror fiction. It's okay. I mean, I enjoy it. I'm still young, but the important thing is that I'm not sold like that, or I don't believe that. I mean, I dress in black, but that's about it. We have very little time left, but I wanted to, there's a story here. Maybe this is more something I want to ask you. Audience, it's a nerdy question. But this story, getting out of there, from You Should Come With Me Now, who reminded me a lot? Robert Eichmann. I don't know why, but there was something in that book also. There was a lot of things that remind me of Eichmann, that also has a very strange grasp on reality. Is he an author that you like?
He's an author I don't know, I'm afraid.
Robert Eichmann? No.
No.
Eichmann. Maybe I'm saying it wrong.
No. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. We pronounce it Eichmann. Yeah.
Eichmann,
okay. Yeah. No. Definitely. I got very interested in. I'd known about him for my whole life because like all of us, I'd read a lot of fiction that is on the edge of horror and the strange and the weird, and so I knew about Eichmann. And then suddenly, about 10 years ago, perhaps a little longer, I suddenly began to think, what is it he does and how does he do it? This idea that in Eichmann, a lot of the time, things are going on that neither you nor the character understand. How does he manage that? I was very interested in his actual mechanisms for managing that. I would say he had influenced that story quite a bit.
Yeah, I thought so. Like I was reading it and this is, like you say, Eichmann. I love him. I think.
Oh, he's brilliant.
He's totally brilliant.
Yeah.
Totally. And what was he worked as something very, I don't know if strange, but he had like a real job also. It's strange, but he was like, don't know what he did. Like it doesn't matter, but.
All I can remember about him is that when he wasn't writing, he was obsessed with canals.
Canals, yeah, that's the thing. But he didn't work in canals. Maybe I invented that.
He was the head of some kind of organization that was to bring the heritage of canals back to life in Britain, and he was very serious about it. And there are these really very cute photographs of this man with very heavy horn-rimmed spectacles sitting in a canal boat, looking ahead as if he's T.E. Lawrence, in the desert on a camel. He was an interesting guy, very strange. Yeah. No, for me, he's like, at the moment, he's a very interesting writer, a very interesting writer.
And also it kind of comes what we were speaking at the beginning just by chance, but yes, in his stories, reader doesn't know what's going on. The characters don't know what's going on. It's absolutely gripping. And it's kind of what we were talking at the beginning, not only with the fiction that you're writing or I'm writing, but with life. We don't really know what's going on.
Exactly. This failure I think of it as failure of epistemology, that our esteem is broken. It's broken. And we no longer know how to get knowledge about our own world. And that is that's what happens in horror stories. And it's certainly what happens in Eichmann, but it happens very subtly in Eichmann. You think the world is normal, but it isn't. And that's true of your stories. And I hope it's true of my stories as well. That, that there's something wrong, there's something awry, but you can't tell what it is. Now, look, before we stop, I have to ask you.
Yeah, tell me.
What of yours is going to be translated into English so that I can read it soon?
I think in earlier next year, it's going to be another book of short stories, but it's older. It's a book of 2009. I wasn't very happy with this, but the thing is that my latest novel that is going to be in 2022, it's very long. So it's taking a long time for the translator to translate it because, of course, it's, the poor girl. It's like 700 pages long.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's called Our Share of Night. There is a fragment of Emily Dickinson. There is a poet I really like. And it's about heritage and, it's about Latin America in a way, and the powerful of Latin America and what they do. But it's also, weird. It's also how Lovecraft and rituals. But
this sounds brilliant. So we'll be able to read that in Great Britain.
Yeah. It's bought already. So somehow they're going to publish one next year and the other one at the beginning of the other year. So yeah.
Brilliant. I'm so glad. And the short stories too. That's really good.
Yeah, short stories is in a couple of months only. So
make sure I get a copy.
Oh yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
You're
Make
the
sure
first.
I get a copy, and that's just great. That's great.
Okay. Yeah, I will tell my editor that when the copies are finished, they send one to you immediately. We only have 4 minutes, so I have to. Before I ask you, I give you the goodbye and hoping to see you again in the flesh, here, there, wherever, in the next festival. I just wanted to ask you, how are you doing with the, with the virus and with the pandemic and stuff? I know England had it very rough. England, or Great Britain, sorry. And we are having it very rough here now. And, I think it's important to address what's, this is going to be recorded and we are in a very strange time.
It's strange because on one hand, if you have any common sense about you understand that the situation is really quite bad in Britain, and I'm sure it is over there as well. And all around you can see people who are not understanding, that they haven't understood yet. That again, it's this whole thing of epistemic failure. They really haven't understood what a virus like this does, and how it can prevent you from acting in certain ways that you take for granted normally. People in Britain seem to be very bad at getting that. Having said all that, because I locked down early, and because I spend most of my time in a house, at the top of a house, in a study, writing books, I haven't actually noticed it all that much personally. And it prevented me from going out climbing for a bit. But actually, I've been out once or twice since the lockdown was eased. And I haven't, contracted the virus yet. So that's cool, because it's not good for people of my age to do that. But it is very strange. What puzzles me most of all about it in our specific UK circumstances is how a government can be so incompetent.
Yeah.
They are so incompetent that, frankly, you begin to believe that it cannot be incompetence. That,
there's purpose. It has to be purpose because,
You have a feeling that they got this idea of herd immunity and it suited their ideology perfectly. Even though actually it's not herd immunity they're talking about. It's effectively a death rate solution. And that basically everything else they've done has been a pretense. It's been a pretense at solving the situation or dealing with the situation, because really they want it to run its course. They want the pandemic to run through the population, burn itself out, leaving a residue of immune of immune people, and that essentially they're simply not admitting to that. Now, that might be a very paranoid reading, but that's the feeling I get. Or rather, that describes my astonishment. Let's not say that I believe that. Let's not say that that I believe some conspiracy is afoot. That is a way of putting my astonishment at their incompetence into an image. And I think if I wrote about it, if I wrote fiction about it, that's how I would do it.
Yeah, I understand.
Is it bad in BA at the moment?
It is. In BA, it's better because there's a lot of people have been infected, so it's going to the provinces. But of course, the problem in a poor country is that the sanitary structure is not. Even if we had a lot of time to prepare, it's never going to be strong enough, because what years of neoliberalism have done too. Even with the comings and goings and different people in government, but basically neoliberalism is what rules the world in a way.
Yeah,
is that things that help people, education, health, they should be cut, and there shouldn't be more of it. And now what we realize is that we need more of it. We don't need we need more.
Yeah. Yeah,
because when the crisis happens, you need more.
Yeah, this is the thing that people in Britain haven't understood is that they have chosen this exact moment. A right-wing government has chosen this exact moment in the middle of a pandemic to attack the health service that we had. And we had the most brilliant health service in the world, I suspect. That it was a kind of genuine welfare state, and they have decided to ideologically remove that right in the middle of circumstances where you need it most, which is terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
It's absolutely insane. Well, maybe our job, you were speaking earlier about what should we write? What are we going to write about? Maybe somehow we should write about how we don't understand.
Yes, that's all you can do. That's all we can do now. And indeed, I think that's why the kind of fiction that you and I do is going to be very important, because it does express that sense of all we know now is that we don't know anything.
Yeah, the writers of uncertainty. It's not bad.
Absolutely.
It's not bad. So I have to say goodbye to you. I'm very, I would speak to you for hours, and I'm sure I will. I love your writing and I love speaking to you. So it's been very nice and important to me.
Well, it's the same here. I want you to understand that it's the same here, that, that collection of yours, which is all I've been able to read, it really shook me. It really did. I really, really think it's brilliant writing. So, it's the same here.
Thank you very much, Mike. You're very generous.
Well, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.